Across time and cultures, humans have sought ways to remain connected to those who came before them. Of course they did. We want to remember our parents, our grandparents, and even further back if we can. In ancient China, this connection wasn't just spiritual. It was woven into the fabric of daily life. And today, we'll explore the traditions of ancestor worship and the intricate systems of ancestor cults in ancient Chinese society. Not the culture you're thinking. This is a little shrine that they had in their house. Let's discover how these practices influence dynasties all the way down to small families. The ancient Chinese believed that while the body was temporary, the soul was eternal. When someone died, their spirit didn't just vanish and kind of go nowhere. It transitioned into the afterlife, where it would continue to exist and interact with the living world. This belief created an unbreakable bond between the living and the dead, because in their minds, the dead weren't really dead. It wasn't just a cultural practice, it was an obligation. Families were responsible for ensuring their ancestors' spirits were well fed, honored, and happy. This unique perspective sets Chinese ancestor worship apart. Ancestors are considered extensions of the natural order, embodiments of the creative force of heaven, or Tian, and mediators between their descendants and the divine. The roots of this tradition stretch way back to the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, some of the very first dynasties in China, evolving from early practices of honoring heaven and ancestors. Over time, families began organizing into lineage societies centered around ancestral shrines. These practices weren't just personal, they were deeply woven into the structure of kinship and even governance. In ancient China, the emperor was known as the Son of Heaven, or Tianzi, and served as a representative of the people in worshiping heaven. Similarly, elders within clans represented their families in rituals and honoring the ancestors. This hierarchical structure ensured that ancestor veneration remained both personal and communal. Ancestor worship largely focused on male ancestors, forming the backbone of what scholars often call the Chinese male religion. This tradition emphasized the male lineage. Their surnames and bloodlines were passed down through men. A family's ancestral home, often defined as the birthplace of the male ancestor 5 generations back, held profound significance. It wasn't just a place, it was a spiritual and cultural anchor for the family's identity. In South China, where lineage bonds are particularly strong, access to ancestral shrines and resources often transcended seniority, emphasizing equality across descent lines. In ancient times, mourning rituals, so rituals after somebody died, were elaborate and deeply symbolic. A 3-year mourning period reflecting the unconditional love of a parent for a child in their early years was common. This practice, famously followed by Kongzi, Confucius's disciples after his death, signified not only grief, but also a profound commitment to filial piety or respect for one's elders. Funerals served as pivotal moments for honoring the dead and protecting the living from evil spirits. Rituals ranged from symbolic washing of the corpse to extravagant offerings of food, money, and even paper models of modern items like computers and credit cards. I don't know, maybe they use credit cards in the afterlife. Apparently. Burials were carefully planned, sometimes delayed to ensure the perfect location was chosen for optimal qi flow or for energy flow. For the wealthy, human or animal sacrifices were common, a testament to the belief that ancestors needed these offerings to thrive in the afterlife. During China's Shang dynasty, so 4,000 years ago, ritual sacrifice was integral to their culture, involving humans and animals, particularly dogs. Recent research on over 2,000 graves at Xiaomintun, a site in Anyang, revealed that about 1/3 contained canine remains, mostly puppies. It's true, I didn't make that up. These findings challenge the notion that buried dogs were pets. Instead, they suggest puppies were used as affordable grave offerings, potentially sourced from puppy mills or local litters. Puppies may have symbolized innocence or fit within a broader trend of miniaturizing grave offerings to reduce costs. The sacrificial practices weren't limited to burials. Oracle bone inscriptions revealed dogs were burned in large-scale rituals for spiritual practices. Now remember, this was like 4,000 years ago, so after that, they didn't really do it. Shang society's ritual sacrifices showed their deep connection to beliefs in the afterlife and the ruler's role as a spiritual intermediary. In every home, the family altar was a sacred space where ancestors were honored. Each tablet or paper slip represented the spirit of a departed family member. These tablets listed the names of ancestors from up to 5 or 6 generations as time passed. Older ancestors' names were removed from the altar, allowing space for new ones. This focus on recent generations kept the family's connection to the deceased immediate and personal. Offerings of food, incense, and prayers were made regularly. These rituals weren't just symbolic, they were seen as necessary for maintaining harmony. If an ancestor's spirit wasn't properly cared for, it might become restless and bring misfortune to the family. This relationship was a two-way street. In return for these offerings, ancestors were believed to protect their descendants, offering guidance, prosperity, and even protection from harm. Sometimes, families sought specific advice from their ancestors who had already passed away. Priests, often trained in Taoist rituals or folk practices, acted as intermediaries. Through divination and fortune-telling, they interpreted messages from the spiritual world. In this way, ancestors weren't just passive about figures of reverence, they were active participants in the family's ongoing story. Ancient worship in China can be divided into 2 categories: the domestic cult and the lineage cult. Now, just for clarity, the word cult has no negative meaning in this context. It is referring to the worship of one's ancestors. The domestic cult revolved around honoring immediate ancestors within the home, while the lineage cult celebrated the family's ancient roots in a more formal setting. Lineage cults were practiced by wealthy or influential families. They often built grand ancestral halls where the most important ancestors were honored for generations. These halls weren't just places of worship. They were community hubs for ceremonies, marriages, and even political gatherings. Take, for example, the ancestral halls of the Song or the Ming dynasties. These structures were masterpieces of architecture, featuring ornate woodwork, calligraphy, and altars of engraved jade or gold. Only the wealthiest families could afford such tributes. Even in smaller towns, these halls played a vital role. Tablets representing ancestors were kept in these spaces and treated with the utmost respect, ensuring the family's legacy endured. While most ancestor worship took place at home, wealthier, influential families established grand ancestral halls to honor their lineage. For example, the Zhou lineage's ancestral shrine in Hebei is a magnificent example of a lineage society's dedication to its founder. Such spaces not only celebrated ancestors, but also reinforced social cohesion. But maintaining these halls wasn't easy. They relied on funding from family estates or endowments left by the original ancestors. If a family lost its wealth, the hall and the legacy it represented might fall into despair. This dependence on wealth meant only the most prominent families could sustain their lineage cults over centuries. For others, ancestor worship remained centered around the home altar. Rituals were rich in symbolism. Food offerings like rice symbolized abundance, while burning joss paper, also called spirit money, ensured that ancestors had wealth in the afterlife. Even specific dates, like the Qingming festival or the Hungry Ghost festival, 中元节, were dedicated to honoring ancestors. Families would visit graves, clean them, and make offerings to reaffirm their connection. Ancestor worship didn't fade with ancient China. It evolved. Today, the Qingming festival allows family to honor their roots, even in a rapidly modernizing world. This enduring tradition speaks to the deep respect the Chinese culture has for its past. It's a reminder that, no matter how far we progress, the ties to our ancestors remain a vital part of who we are. The practice of ancestor worship shows us the profound power of family connections, spanning not just lifetimes, but centuries. Whether it's through grand halls or humble altars, the bonds between the living and the dead remain unbroken. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the rich spiritual traditions of ancient China. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to explore more fascinating stories from Chinese history and culture. Until next time, 再见!